Using a freezer is a great way to extend the shelf life of our steaks, but what happens when we push the limit? What we have in front of us are two extremely rare steaks that have been sitting in my freezer for over 2 years.
The Iceman cometh.
Today, we're gonna figure out if steaks are still edible after freezing for an extremely long period of time. Please wish me luck on this one. Let's get started. Okay, so first things first, let's take a look at our 2-year frozen steaks. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that these steaks were not frozen properly whatsoever. As you can see, the vacuum on this seal is completely gone. There is a huge amount of freezer burn on this steak right here. And over here, you'll see a pretty pitiful attempt at sealing it completely. Pretty much just used plastic wrap and a Ziploc. So the first one I'm gonna open up is this guy right here, and this is an extremely rare and unique steak. So this steak right here is a Miyazaki Wagyu A5 100-day dry-aged bone-in ribeye. Did I get all the words out there? And it is extremely rare for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, it has ridiculous marbling because it's Wagyu A5. Second is the fact that it's bone-in. Importing bone-in Wagyu rib roasts is pretty much impossible to do, and that's why you rarely see them. Thirdly, this steak has been dry aged for over 100 days. Typically when we dry age stuff, it's only around, 30 to 45 days. So this thing has been aged for an extensive amount of time. And lastly, as I've mentioned, this steak has been frozen for over 2 years, which I'm not necessarily proud of. So a couple years ago, my friend Nick actually made a video on this exact same steak right here.
This is a Miyazaki Gyu A5 bone-in Wagyu ribeye steak. That is a mouthful.
Pretty wild video. You should definitely check it out if you haven't already. But he had a couple extra steaks. He ended up giving me one. I put the steak in my freezer, and over the months, it sort of made its way to the very bottom. I was trying to find the perfect time to cook it. Didn't find the perfect time and honestly kind of forgot about it. But I realized this would be the perfect video for it, so here we are. And I'm not gonna lie, this steak would be perfect for ping pong. And next up, we have steak number 2, which is our American Wagyu Delmonico. I'm just gonna start by opening this up, and this thing is looking absurd. Check this thing out. So if you've been watching my content for a while, then this steak might look a bit familiar.
And go nuts when he hits this thing.
But this here is a bone-in Delmonico. And as you can see, it looks very similar to a ribeye. In fact, this cut right here is actually an extension of the rib roast. So as we get closer to the front of the animal, this steak right here comes right after the ribeyes are done. But what's really cool about this cut, unlike most ribeyes, this one still has that full bone attached. And not only that, it even has the short rib still attached. And as you can see, the marbling on this is phenomenal. But we gotta discuss the elephant in the room here, and that's this piece right here, the huge amount of freezer burn. So freezer burn is developed when the meat is exposed to air. As it starts to dehydrate, the water that comes out freezes and turns into this. And as you can see, even though it's frozen, it looks extremely dry and almost like a desert or just dehydrated. It's hard to explain, but it does not look very good. Check out what this freezer burn actually is. It's literally just like snow. Sophia, you want to have a snowball fight with a 2-year freezer burned steak? Assuming I survive after eating this, if it does somehow actually taste good, that would be very shocking, but there's only one way to find out. Okay, and all that's left to do is place these guys in the fridge to defrost overnight. In the meantime, while they're defrosting, we're gonna do a quick experiment to figure out if steaks being frozen for a more moderate amount of time has any impact whatsoever. So these here are 2 identical steaks. This one here has never been frozen. This one over here has been frozen for about 1 week. It's been fully vacuum sealed, so great freezing conditions, and we're gonna compare the two. But I'm first gonna let this quickly defrost. Okay, it's fully defrosted. We have our frozen steak and our never before frozen. I opened them up and just patted them dry. Seasoning simply with some salt, and of course some black pepper. Avocado oil into a hot pan, then in with the steaks, searing to develop a nice crust. I pulled them right around 120 Fahrenheit. Both steaks were cooked to a nice medium rare, and just visually, it was impossible to tell which one had been frozen. Either way, it was time to give them a taste. Okay, it is time for a blind taste test to see if I can tell the difference between both these steaks. Sophia, can I please have one of the steaks? This is the first steak. Tastes like steak. Juicy, tender. Try the next one. Okay, the second steak. Okay, once again, that tasted just like steak. To be honest, I have no idea which was which. They taste exactly the same to me. What that tells us though is that in and of itself, freezing is not necessarily a negative. But the real question is freezing for that super extended 2-year period gonna make a difference? Let's find out. Okay, and just like that, our steaks are defrosted, and we're gonna start by cooking this guy here. So as you can see, there are 2 very distinct sections on this steak. We have this short rib section right here and this big chuck ribeye, AKA the Delmonico. This short rib takes the longest to cook, so we're gonna remove that and cook it first. And all I did was just follow the bone to remove our short rib. Okay, I'm gonna be honest here, guys. I did leave a pretty good amount of short rib meat here, but overall, we still have a nice giant hunk of short rib. And as you can see, just fantastic marbling on this. We have this giant chunk of fat here, so I'm just gonna trim this up a bit. It's like all fat. I'm also just gonna do some trimming over the top. We do want some fat, but no need for it to be excessive. There's also this silver skin here. Do my best to get rid of most of it. And just like that, our boneless short rib is all trimmed up, and it looks and actually smells very good. And we're just gonna slice this in half so it's a bit easier to work with. Pretty nice marbling in there. Now we're just gonna season these with some salt, and just gonna make sure we get both sides. And of course, some black pepper. And we're gonna be turning these into some traditional red wine braised short ribs. Add some oil, and now just gonna give these short ribs a quick sear. All right, while those are searing off, we're gonna just chop up some of our vegetables here. Got our carrots, and now some celery, and some onion. Now I'm just gonna check on these short ribs. Oh yeah, as you can see, we've developed a beautiful crust. Just gonna remove the short ribs. Now we're just gonna add in the vegetables. You want to let these cook down, scraping the bottom to release all that flavor. Now we're just going to add in some tomato paste and let this cook in. Oh man. All right, we're going to add in some red wine. And now that some of the alcohol has cooked out of that wine, we're going to add in our beef stock, some thyme, and bay leaves. Now we're just going to let these cook on low heat. Okay, and now it is time to trim up our giant tomahawk. And this cut is made up of a few different muscles. Right here we have the eye of a ribeye. In here we have the spinalis, or the ribeye cap, which is by far the best cut. And because this is taken closer to the shoulder, we have a relatively big complexus muscle right here. But you'll also notice we have this big muscle here. This is not the ribeye cap. This is actually called lifter meat, and we're gonna remove it since it's super tough. And as you can see, I can almost just like peel it apart. Maybe a little bit of help with the knife, but it just comes right off. And as you can see, this is starting to resemble more of like a tomahawk ribeye. To expose this bone here, I'm just gonna do a bit more trimming. Cleaning up the bone like this is really just for the visual. And interestingly, I could just peel away the silver skin attached to the bone. And it is all trimmed up. Honestly, sort of looks like a clothes iron. Do some damage on a black shirt with this. But as you can see, if it didn't have this bone here, it would look like a completely normal bone-in tomahawk ribeye. Now we're just gonna season this up with a coarse steak rub. Just gonna make sure to get both sides as well as the edges. Then got it on the grill. And of course, we're smoking over applewood, low and slow. Okay, and it is time to cook up our dry-aged Wagyu steak. As you can see, there is a huge amount of discoloration on this steak. This is what it looked like when I first got it. But what stands out the most to me is that absolutely ridiculous marbling. It's gotta be well over 50% fat. So to start, I'm actually gonna remove this directly off the bone. This is gonna allow me to slice this into more manageable pieces. Now I'm just gonna remove this cap muscle right here. Literally feels like I'm slicing into cheese. Look at that fat. I'm just gonna square this off and slice this into strips. This stuff is wild. It has this like almost snowflake type appearance. I would love to know what they would charge in a restaurant for something like this. We just have these absolutely perfect cubes of Wagyu. And for something like this, we of course need to keep the seasoning extremely simple, just using a bit of kosher salt. Once seasoned up, it was time to sear. With such high fat content, there was no need to add any oil to the pan, and I kept the heat on high, allowing us to develop color before overcooking the inside. And I'm not gonna lie, I absolutely set off the fire alarm with this one. As you can see, we have a beautiful golden brown crust, but check out how much of that oil and fat has come out of these steaks. Once they reached 125 Fahrenheit, I pulled them off to rest. And we're left with these perfect little golden nuggets of Wagyu. Pretty crazy looking. That is just so freaking fatty, wow. At which point, back on the grill, the Delmonico reached 125F as well. And here we have our bone-in Delmonico. Let's sear it off. With the steak fully cooked, all I needed to do was hit it with some high heat to really fortify that bark. And once again, I set off that damn fire alarm. I removed the steak from the bone, and we were left with a really nice medium rare on the inside. And at this point, I would have never known that the steak was frozen for so long. It really looked and smelled perfect. I mean, this thing looks insanely juicy. With that complete, the short rib version of the steak had finished braising. I can tell these things are just insanely tender. But first, I'm just gonna strain off all of that deliciousness from the pan, but definitely save all those vegetables, especially the garlic. And what I did do is just reduce that sauce into this absolutely delicious, beefy red wine glaze. This stuff here is straight up crack. Now, if we did this right, it should be a no knives required situation, but let's see. Oh yeah, just insanely tender. Just gonna mix it all up in that sauce. This honestly looks amazing. Does not seem like it's 2 years old, that is for sure. And at last, all the steaks were complete. While they looked surprisingly good, it was finally time to give them a taste. Well guys, if you're seeing this, it means I have survived eating the 2-year-old frozen meat. But I'm gonna start over here with the braised short rib. Just looks the least intimidating. Let's see how it is. That is phenomenal. It really has an intense beefy flavor, and I could not tell whatsoever that that thing was frozen for 2 years. Next up, we have that reverse seared Delmonico, and I'm really gonna be looking for any changes to flavor and juiciness. Very juicy still. The flavor tastes great. There's no like off flavors or anything like that. I really wish I had a comparison steak to see if there were true differences. And last but not least, we have the 100-day Wagyu A5 dry aged 2 years frozen little tater tots. That is not steak. There's so much fat in there, it literally like exploded in my mouth. In terms of flavor, that is the most intense dry age funk I've ever experienced. I feel like if I were to eat this again, I'd use a very small amount, like incorporated into a dish. Can I tell that it's frozen?
No.
So the moral of the story, should you freeze your steaks for 2 years plus? Realistically, no, but if you do have steaks that have been frozen for a while, they can turn out quite good. But either way, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you've made it this far, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, also like the video, and I'll see you next time.